Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the tabling of these estimates must be viewed from its impact on the local population. Have the money spent in the last fiscal year, 2018-2019, improved the lives of most St. Lucians? And are there reasons to believe that the planned expenditure for 2019 to 2020 are realistic and likely to improve the living conditions of the people of St. Lucia? Mr. Speaker, the management of the St. Lucian economy must be done in an environment of fairness and inclusion, and with a level of fiscal responsibility, so that our young people are not burdened with the debts that we are undertaking today. Mr. Speaker, our procurement rules are designed to meet the requirements of fairness and inclusion, so that the people of St. Lucia can get value for money from all government expenditure. But what has been the experience to date? We have been seeing an unprecedented number of government contracts awarded without contractors being invited to tender. The government, in a show of contempt for good governance and accountability, are awarding multi-million-dollar contracts to friends, to family, and to foreigners. It is no wonder that the vast majority of St. Lucians are worse off with a worsening healthcare system, which government ministers and their families avoid, for instead they seek overseas healthcare. Relatively high fuel prices and rising food prices at the supermarkets, as evidenced in the increase in consumer prices as stated in the Social and Economic Review. This is the real story on the ground in St. Lucia. This is particularly hard for St. Lucians to stomach, when large sums of government money are being wasted on harebrained projects like DSH and on fines and penalties incurred by government on account of poor management. Mr. Speaker, this is the context in which I will examine these estimates, and not with the yellow eyes of this government, which seek to distract the people of St. Lucia, believing it is clever politics. Mr. Speaker, it is not clever politics. It's harmful and disrespectful to the well-being of the people whom they were elected to serve. Mr. Speaker, the effects of bypassing the tendering process are there to see. According to the estimates on page 23, $18 million was spent by the Ministry of Economic Development in the last fiscal year on the George Odlum Stadium, page 523 of the estimates, of which $15 million was on the building. As we speak, despite the massive expenditure, parts of the stadium still have no roof, and the environment in the stadium shows flies taking over the facility, making it uncomfortable for the health workers. Despite the spending of $15 million, the St. Jude Hospital site or the George Odlum Stadium still remains a construction site. The question must be asked, how was that money spent? Who will account for the $18 million of taxpayers' funds that was spent on the George Odlum Stadium, as shown in the estimates, page 523? In spite of this massive expenditure, The healthcare at the facility has not improved. People continue to die because of a lack of adequate resources. These monies that are being wasted still need to be funded, either through borrowing or taxes. Well, they have targeted the minibus drivers to pay up more. Never mind the high price of fuel created by the imposition of the $4 excise tax on every gallon of fuel. On page 66 of the estimates, route permit fees are to increase by over 500% in the year 2019 to 2020. We await to see the effects on commuters, whether it will be shown in an increase in bus fares. Will the citizens of this country get a proper accounting for the $40 million of consultancy services and commissions that were paid in the last fiscal year? Were all the consultants chosen by tender? What did these consultants produce? And what efforts were made to utilize the capacity within the civil service to perform these consultancy services? Will the $47.4 million of capital expenditure allocated to the Ministry of Economic Development follow the customary path of direct awards to closely connected contractors to the government? These are the questions that need to be answered if we are to determine whether the plans for 2019 and 2020 are no different from last year's preferential arrangements for the granting of contracts. Mr. Speaker, it is proposed that there will be $246.7 million for capital expenditure in the 2019-2020 budget. But there is little hope for many contractors looking for work. So, Mr. Speaker, you can understand, with so much money to be spent on capital projects, and why are so many contractors unlikely to benefit because of the policy of awarding direct awards? Another abuse of the rules, only because the procurement rules provided for a small window of direct awards for emergency situations. This government insists that all major capital projects have to be awarded by direct awards, and many of them to a favored contractor. I leave it to the people to decide on the character of those entrusted to run the affairs of this country. Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Lucia are convinced that the direct awards of these major contracts are unfair and open to corruption, nepotism, and wastage. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to an analysis of the budget summary as presented by the Prime Minister in the estimates. The government will make much of an increase in overall revenue collected of $49 million over last year. A closer analysis of the figure indicates that the revenue increase under the CIP program was significant, from a projected $29 million to $66 million, a difference of $47 million. There was also a significant increase of over $20.1 million in current transfers. The Social and Economic Review indicates that this increase was due, and I quote, to a payment to settle a legal matter with a CIP developer. However, the amount paid to that CIP developer was not disclosed and has never been disclosed in either the estimates or in the Social and Economic Review. In the interest of accountability, the exact figure paid needs to be disclosed, since the Prime Minister has openly accepted blame for the failure of this project. Once more, I want to advise civil servants always to maintain their professionalism and resist the pressures from politicians to withhold important information which should be in the public domain. And we ask the question one more time: how much money was paid for the failed range project? How much money did the government pay to the developer for the failed range project. Mr. Speaker, I note the massive increase in capital expenditure for 2019-2020, in excess of 100 million over that of 2018-2019. The rate of project implementation in previous years is not encouraging. In 2017-2018, capital expenditure 157 million fell $19 million short of the approved estimates for the same year. In 2018-2019, capital expenditure of 143 million will again fall short by 43 million of the approved estimates for the same year. If the capacity was not there to realize smaller levels of capital expenditure in the previous 2 years, then we have no reason to believe that the government will be able to implement the capital expenditure projects it has planned for 2019-2020, totaling 246 million. The poor level of implementation in previous years, coupled with no evidence of improved project implementation capacity, make the 2019-2020 capital budget unrealistic. No amount of sword-turning events and project announcements will erase the image of a Minister of Finance carrying an empty basket promising food for people. We have too much evidence of a Prime Minister and Minister of Finance who promises much and delivers little. Public trust in this government has long gone, with justification. Mr. Speaker, I have good reason to believe that the allocation of expenditure under some headings fails to tell the true picture of what some departments are costing to the people of St. Lucia. On page 147 of the estimates, the High Commissioner's office in London, it is said, has 5 persons approved. Yet, my information tells me there are at least 9 people working in that office. The increase in recurrent expenditure for the Ministry of External Affairs was over $1 million. $1 million more in increased expenditure for the Ministry of External Affairs, recurrent expenditure. Yet, it was that same government, when in opposition, complained about the level of expenditure in the foreign missions. There is also need to uncover and to disclose some government expenditure that appears to be buried in the estimates. I refer to the monies paid to the attaches, to the ministers. Under what caption in the estimates are they, and how much is being paid to these attaches? Where do they appear in the estimates, and how much is being paid to these attaches? We note the increase in transfers of $18 million. And as I stated before, no mention is made to the amount paid to range for the ill-fated project, which the Prime Minister has not explained to the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, the National Trust is still being punished by withdrawal of its subvention. Mr. Speaker, the government's fiscal irresponsibility continues. All significant financial indicators are expected to decline this year. Signs are that the Minister of Finance is getting desperate to get the economy moving, having wasted almost 3 years, disrupting projects he inherited from the last administration, and seeking ways to reward his friends, family, and foreigners. So he has planned to plunge the country into a deficit position in the hope he can revive the economy with the next elections on the horizon. He does not mind plunging the economy in a deficit position with the hope of getting some projects ready with the next elections close at hand. For the year 2019-2020, it is projected that surpluses will decrease and deficits increase, leading to an overall deficit of 189 million, of 3.5% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, this government is reckless, putting the country in debt with an overspend of nearly 200 million. Within the context of what this government inherited, when the primary balance was positive and the overall deficit was 1.9% of GDP, he is now steering the economy in the wrong direction. All this because of an uncaring government that is misguided by the selfish desires of winning elections. Mr. Speaker, I expect to hear in the policy statement by the Prime Minister the same promises of huge projects, huge hotel developments, huge projects that we've heard from the year 2017. But we may move a step further in that we may have some sort turning this year. Mr. Speaker, the Social and Economic Review indicates on page 47 a higher current account surplus, which is expected to increase to 76.7 million in 2017-2018 to 97.9 million in 2018-2019. The budget summary does not seem to say the same story. The budget summary shows the current account to be in deficit of 20 million in the 2017-2018. And it states that the current account surplus is 40 million and is projected to be 5 million in the coming year. So we need to have an explanation as to why the difference between what's in the Social and Economic Review and what is said in the budget summary. Mr. Speaker, the increase in excise tax on fuel was proposed initially to be in a lockbox. Now, the language has changed to earmarked. It's no longer in a lockbox, but it's earmarked. The increase in revenue was due to a large extent to the relatively high taxes on fuel. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister once again, how much is in the lockbox? Mr. Speaker, interest charges will increase this year due to an increase in borrowing by central governments. Mr. Speaker, the government's dismal performance in capital expenditure is the reason for the improvement in the deficit. If the approved expenditure for the year of 143 million had been utilized, then the situation would be different. The government's boast is actually a mirage, since its capital spending contracted by 15.3%, the lowest since the year 2008-2009, when the United Workers' Party were in power. The low growth rate of just over 1% shows that the economy is not growing, hence the relatively flat unemployment figures. The growth in the economy for the past year was only 1%, 1.5%, and it shows that all the government's policies and all the government's spending did not manifest itself in any growth in the economy, since growth was only 1%. 1.5%. Mr. Speaker, I turn to the issue of debt. And I want to outline what this Parliament approved in the last fiscal year. In October 2018, this Parliament approved $2 million, which is 5.4 million EC from the International Development Association. In that same sitting, this Parliament approved 3 million for a Tiroche wall from the First National Bank. In that same sitting, the Parliament approved 32.6 million from the First National Bank. In that same sitting, the Parliament approved 20 million or 54 million EC from the International Development Association. In December 2018, at the sitting of Parliament, the Parliament approved 24.3 million from the Bank of St. Lucia and 8.1 million from the Bank of St. Lucia, 50 million or 145 million from the Export-Import Bank of Taiwan, and 4.9 million US, or 14.23 million EC from the Caribbean Development Bank. A total of $275 million without the inclusion of treasury bills. However, the budget summary shows a total of only $197 million. We need an explanation for the difference between what the Parliament approved and what is shown in the budget summary. There also is evidence, Mr. Speaker, that in the budget summary, it is said that only $39 million was sourced from local banks. But if you look at just the borrowing in October was $45 million, and if you go to the borrowing in December, which was $32 million from local banks, it shows that it has been more than the $30 million shown in the budget summary for borrowing from local banks. We need an explanation, Mr. Speaker, for why the approvals given in Parliament do not reflect in the budget summary. Mr. Speaker, the total national debt is $3.3 billion. We note an increase in the national debt of $4.1 billion when compared to the period 2017-2018 of 3.5, which was lower than the period 2009 to 2014. It is clear, Mr. Speaker, that the UWP government's record on debt is not what is espoused by the Prime Minister. The UWP government continues to put the country into more debt. Government intends to borrow $332 million this year without any mention of the guarantee for the Hiwanora International Airport. Mr. Speaker, the IMF report for St. Lucia flags the rise in public debt and projects an increase to 81.3 million, 81.3% of GDP in the year 2023, even after the government had the benefit of a 19% increase in nominal GDP that reduced the level of public debt in terms of percentages. I want to say that again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the IMF report, the latest one for St. Lucia, flags the rise in public debt and projects an increase in the debt to GDP of 81.3% in 2023, even after the government had the benefit of a 19% increase in nominal GDP that reduced the public debt in terms of percentages. The question is, Mr. Speaker, why is the government putting this country in debt that the country does not deserve? That is the question. 81.3% in 2023, when this government told the ECCB that they intend to reduce the national debt to 60%, I think, by the year 2025 or something of that nature. But then the IMF says that it's going to be 81.3% in 2023, according to the IMF. That is reckless financial management, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the Social and Economic Review on page 8 states that the initial estimates of growth in 2018-2019 was only 1.5%, as compared to 2016-2017, which the growth rate was 3.3%. It is fair, Mr. Speaker, to say that while this government boasted that they did not have their own budget to work with, the growth rates of 3.3% in 2016-2017 and the growth rates of 2018-2019 of only 1.5%, it shows that when the United Workers' Party had their own budget to work with, a budget that they conceived and they produced, the growth rate was only 1.5%. So whereas they complained that they could not deal with our budget, they couldn't make the changes for the year of, there was a year of, this year is a year of implementation, then there was a year of there were several years called. But they only, in their year, when they had full management of the economy, the only rate of growth that this government, that boasts all the time of performance, the only rate, the rate of growth was only 1.5%. Only 1.5%. Only 1.5%, Mr. Speaker. The rate of growth under the United Workers' Party government that boasts, that will boast, was only 1.5%. But, Mr. Speaker, it is significant that there was a 20.2% decline in construction activity in 2018, which clearly shows that there have been little construction projects initiated by this government in 2018. And private sector confidence appears to be weak, even if the Social and Economic Review mentions private sector construction as part of the construction profile of this government. The policy of direct awards and its limited reach also accounts for the decline in that sector. The increase in revenue, Mr. Speaker, does not manifest itself in the overall performance of the economy. Growth of 1.5% was flat. The projected growth in the year 2019-2020 is based on an increase in borrowing and an unrealistic expansion in capital expenditure. Mr. Speaker, if there was any a case of the numbers not telling the story on the ground, these estimates are it. They do not tell the hardship of the majority of St. Lucians. They do not tell the hardship of people who cannot source health care because the government refuses to complete St. Jude Hospital. They do not tell the hardship of the people when they go to the emergency room at Victoria Hospital, have to spend hours because the doctors and nurses are overburdened. They do not tell the hardship of heart patients who have had to stay in a wheelchair because there were no beds available at the Victoria Hospital. These figures do not tell the hardship, Mr. Speaker. And there are good reasons why the people of St. Lucia will have no confidence in what is going to be said by the government in this estimates debates. Because the people of St. Lucia are convinced that if the word of contracts, if only in the word of contracts, there is no transparency and there is no accountability, because this government insists in awarding contracts by direct awards. They insist. And in spite of all the complaints from the public, this government insists that contracts will be awarded by direct award. And I want to ask Mr. Speaker, who the work that's happening now at the St. Jude Hospital, who is the contractor and how was that contract awarded? Were the people of St. Lucia given an opportunity, or were the contractors of St. Lucia given an opportunity to tender? So the people of St. Lucia, the taxpayers of St. Lucia, the young people of St. Lucia who will be called upon to pay these loans will have a fair chance in that the contractor that was chosen was the contractor who bidded the lowest price. How do the people of St. Lucia know that in that massive capital expenditure that is planned by this government, that they will have value for money, in that several contractors will be allowed to tender so that the best price and the best value can be incurred to the people of St. Lucia? So, Mr. Speaker, the details beneath these numbers is important. And why are so many citizens not experiencing what little growth there may be? If you go to the streets, Mr. Speaker, and you ask the people of St. Lucia, you ask them, has the government policy impacted on their lives? Are they having a better life? Are things improving for them? Are they feeling that the government is more transparent or more accountable? Are they feeling that the health care is improving? If you ask them, Mr. Speaker, are they feeling that they are more secure? Are they feeling more secure after the Prime Minister promised to deal with the security issues? If you ask the majority of people in St. Lucia, with all the expenses that this government is incurring for national security, are they feeling more secure in St. Lucia today? I'm sure the answer will be no. Mr. Speaker, the answer for the exclusion of so many St. Lucians from whatever benefits the economy may have experienced is due to the hurtful economic policies and the lack of transparency and the vindictiveness of this government. This government, Mr. Speaker, in their policies, in the execution of the capital expenditure, have insisted, and I will say it again, in direct awards. Only recently, we heard of another direct award for the improvement in the hospital, another direct award. That, for the market, that talk of improvement in the market has been going on for over a year. Why couldn't this government tender for the work of the improvement in the market? It wasn't something, it was not an emergency. It wasn't something that had to happen right away. It's over a year there has been that talk about improvement in the market. But no, you must do it by direct award. We have to ask ourselves the question. And that question, Mr. Speaker, is not for me, you know. I've said so before. All of us in this honorable house, sometime we'll be out. It's the people of St. Lucia, the young people of St. Lucia, who will be called upon to pay these debts. Not us. We're going to be out, even though some of us believe that this thing belongs to us, and we are kings. We not Stevenson King. We are not, Mr. Speaker. We act as if we are kings and this thing belongs to us, and we can do whatever we want and say whatever we want and arrogantly dismiss people when they raise queries. The question is not we are not the ones who are going to be paying for that. It's the young people of St. Lucia who are going to be paying for this largesse and this lack of inclusion and lack of transparency in the affairs of the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I want to deal with my constituency. I haven't done so in depth for a while, but I want to deal with my constituency, Mr. Speaker, because there are some hopefuls who seem to be upping the ante. But Mr. Speaker, as has happened before, same old story, same old plan, nothing changed, nothing changed, same story. There's not even a change in the modus operandi. But as happened before, as will happen again, the majority will increase by 4 times. Mr. Speaker, I speak of the expenses in the Ministry of Infrastructure. And the Ministry of Infrastructure has been the only ministry that has tried to follow what the minister found. What? I said try to follow. What is that the Ministry of Infrastructure completed the Tamoso Bridge, they completed the Canaries Bridge. But I want to tell the Minister of Infrastructure that there is no. Tamoso is ours. The minister was smart. He continued. He didn't do like his friends. I want to tell the Minister of Infrastructure that there's only one road that I need to be resurfaced in my constituency. That's the Marshall Main Road. And the only reason why the Marshall Main Road was not resurfaced when I was there, because I don't want to be selfish. Well, if you want to say so. So I want to ask the Minister in the expenditure for the Ministry of Infrastructure, I'd like him to put in the Marshall Main Road. That's the only road in my constituency. And Mr. Speaker, I don't want to boast. I know my colleagues from Castries East get vexed with me. All the roads in my constituency are perfect. Bocage, Chabot. I mean, the Enchibo housing area has the best roads in the country under my representation. So I saw about the people. So the Marshall Main Road is the only road that I need to be resurfaced. Mr. Speaker, under the $20 million that needs to be spent that is proposed to be spent in the Ministry of Sports, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask this government to look at the Marshall grounds. Mr. Speaker, in the last financial year, or in the last term of government, when this government looked to share the pie of this country equally, the Marshall grounds, $1 million was spent on the Marshall grounds. The Marshall grounds was lighted. The Marshall grounds, the entire surface was resurfaced. The entire ground was resurfaced. The lights on the Marshall ground were of international standards. But we did not have time. We did some work on the James Belgrave Court, but which is a problem that we have to solve, due to vandalism, it was damaged. We also put changing room facilities, toilets, etc. on the Marshall grounds. But again, that is something I cannot condone, and I will not condone the changing rooms were vandalized. So in the expenses, I know somebody promised the people of Marshall a swimming pool. Yes, they were promised a swimming pool in Marshall. But you know, that is the habit of promises, promises, promises. I want to tell the Prime Minister, even though people are making promises of swimming pools, all I want him to do, all I want the Minister of Sports to do, is to fix the Marshall Grounds Pavilion, re-roof it. It is in need of repair, and if you're spending $26 million, you can spend $1 million on the Marshall Grounds. Mr. Speaker, the Rock Hall lands. I was invited by the Ministry of Housing to have a look at what's happening in the Rock Hall area. I will support any fair rationalization of the lands at Rock Hall, because that was started by us, and I want to continue. I think the people of Rock Hall need to be able to buy the land on which the houses are, and I will support the government in the rationalization of the lands at Rock Hall. But I want to advise the government that the people of Rock Hall only have one representative. I want to advise the government that the people of Rock Hall only have one representative. And I will support any rationalization of the lands in that area. I will support it because the people of Rock Hall, and we started it. We started already. I want to continue. I want to support the rationalization of lands in that area. Mr. Speaker, the final in my constituency that I want to speak of is a so-called project in an area in a place called Lapuizlo. Mr. Speaker, Lapuizlo. Mr. Speaker, it is disrespectful. It is disrespectful to Wasco and the minister in charge of Wasco. It is disrespectful for Wasco to enter into discussions about the use of facilities in my constituency without informing me. It is very disrespectful. I am the elected parliamentary representative for Castries East, and any development in any of our constituencies should be and must be passed through us. So informing me of so-called developments in Lapuizlo based on discussions that with someone who has no legitimacy to get to be involved in these projects is disrespectful. And I want to tell the minister in charge of Wasco to tell Wasco they must have some respect for the parliamentary representative of Castries East. If not, you don't seem to understand what I'm saying, so I'm not saying anything. All I'm saying is that that is disrespect, Mr. Speaker, and each one of us feel the same way about ministers, about the government coming to our constituencies and executing projects or trying to execute projects without discussions with the elected parliamentary representative. When we were in government, I can give you at least 2 examples where the shadow Minister for Communications and Works was called in to discuss the North-South Link Road, where the leader of the United Workers' Party and the shadow Minister of Communications and Works was called in to discuss the airport redevelopment project. But what this government wants to do or seeks to do is to empower people who have been rejected by the people of St. Lucia. This is disrespectful, and I want to call on this government to stop that practice, because this practice will not give them the advantage of winning the seat which they think they will get. It's always shown that when these things happen, the majority increases in the next year. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I have no hope in the estimates. I do not think that the estimates will change life in St. Lucia. I do not think that the estimates which will improve health care. I think the people of St. Lucia will continue to suffer because of inadequate health care, because the health care that they receive is due to the government's not completing the St. Jude Hospital and not commissioning the OKEU Hospital. I think that the estimates will not improve the lives of the people of St. Lucia. I think the estimates will still see the increase in prices at the supermarkets. I think that this government is living in a world of illusion and in a world of make-believe, where you believe that the more you say something, or the more you deflect, or the more flashing mirrors that you have, you will fool people. This is not a game of fooling people. This is not a game of upmanship. This is about the development of St. Lucia. This is about the future of our young people. This is not a game of seeing who can outsmart each other. It's a game where you have to look at the reality of the world, the reality of what's happened in the country. And everyone will tell you, or most people will tell you, that the country is not going in the right direction. The country is not in the right direction. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you that I have no confidence in the estimates. I have no confidence that the government will meet the capital expenditure that it is projecting. And in the final analysis, St. Lucians will only see a government that is scrambling because they have failed to initiate some well-founded projects that they got. They failed to initiate it. And now, with elections around the corner, I always told them that 4 years was not 40 years. They've realized now that elections are around the corner, so there's a mad rush, there's a mad scramble. So all the arrogance, all the you did it too, and all that you'll never get there, that the reality is coming, because very soon the people of St. Lucia will be called upon to make a decision as to which government will take them into the next 5 years. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.